Conquest arrives the same way he always does, like a storm that already knows it has won. Calm, smiling, completely certain that whatever stands in front of him will break. And in the original timeline, that confidence made sense because Mark was still figuring himself out, still reacting instead of deciding, still holding on to limits that Conquest was built to exploit. But this time, the air feels different. The second Conquest lands because the man waiting for him is not the same Mark Grayson. This is Emperor Mark, a version of him shaped by domination, by control, by a mindset that stopped asking what is right and started asking what works. And that single shift changes everything before a single punch is thrown, because Conquest thrives on fear and hesitation, and Emperor Mark has neither. He stands there still, not defensive, not tense, just watching, measuring, already planning 3 moves ahead, like this is not a fight but an execution waiting to happen. And Conquest notices it immediately, that slight tilt of his head, that curiosity, because he has fought thousands of battles and he knows when something feels off, he knows when prey looks back like a predator. And that is exactly what he is seeing now. And instead of rushing in like he did before, he takes a second longer. He speaks. He tests. But Emperor Mark does not engage in conversation. He does not banter. He does not try to reason. Because this version of Mark learned the hard way that talking wastes time, and time in a Viltrumite battle is blood. So the moment Conquest finishes his first sentence, Mark moves, not fast in a flashy way, but efficient, direct. The kind of speed that closes distance before your brain registers danger, and the first hit lands harder than Conquest expects. Not because of raw strength alone, but because of intent. Because Emperor Mark does not pull punches, there is no subconscious restraint, no hesitation about killing. Every strike is aimed to end the fight immediately, and that forces Conquest into something he rarely experiences early in a battle. Adaptation. He has to adjust, block, redirect, because the rhythm is wrong, the pacing is wrong. This is not a drawn-out fight. This is pressure from the first second. And that pressure builds fast. Mark does not give him space, does not let him breathe. Chaining attacks with precision, targeting weak points, eyes, throat, joints, using every brutal trick he has learned from ruling instead of protecting. And Conquest starts smiling wider, not because he is winning, but because he is finally being challenged in a way he respects. But even that enjoyment has limits. Because Emperor Mark is not fighting for pride, he is fighting for control. And control means removing variables. So when Conquest tries to escalate, tries to grab and overpower, Mark shifts tactics instantly, using speed bursts to reposition, using the environment, slamming Conquest through structures not randomly but deliberately, collapsing angles, limiting movement, turning the battlefield into a cage, and this is where the difference becomes undeniable. Original Mark fought like someone trying to survive. Emperor Mark fights like someone who already decided the outcome, and Conquest starts taking real damage earlier than he should, deeper damage. Because Mark is not reacting, he is dictating, and that forces Conquest into desperation faster than expected. He increases output, goes all in, because that is who he is. Overwhelming force. But Emperor Mark anticipated that. He has seen power spikes, he has lived through them, and instead of matching force with force, he absorbs, redirects, then counters at the exact moment Conquest overextends. And that is the first major turning point. A clean, brutal counter that sends Conquest crashing with actual impact, not just movement. And for a split second there is silence. The kind that only happens when something impossible just occurred, and Conquest realizes it. This is not a fight he controls anymore. This is a fight he might lose. And that realization fuels him, pushes him into his most dangerous state, reckless aggression. But reckless is exactly what Emperor Mark punishes best, because reckless creates openings, and openings are all he needs, so the fight becomes sharper, faster, more violent, but also more one-sided in structure, because every exchange costs Conquest more than it costs Mark. Every mistake is amplified, every missed hit becomes a counter-opportunity, and the damage accumulates, not in random bursts, but in a steady, crushing progression until Conquest's durability starts to crack under focused targeting. And that is something almost no one has achieved against him. And even then Conquest keeps going, because that is what he does. He laughs through pain, he pushes forward. But Emperor Mark does not respond to that energy. He does not get dragged into the chaos. He stays locked in, calm, controlled, like a machine that learned violence instead of emotion. And that mental gap is what truly decides the fight, not just strength or speed, but clarity. Because Conquest thrives when his opponent breaks mentally, and Emperor Mark never even bends. And that frustrates Conquest. It irritates him, and frustration leads to mistakes. Bigger ones now, desperate lunges, overcommitted strikes, and each one gets punished harder than the last, until finally there is a moment where Conquest commits fully, everything into one attack. Expecting the usual response, resistance or retreat. But Emperor Mark does something different. He steps in instead of back, takes the risk, closes the gap completely, and delivers a decisive blow at point-blank range. The kind of hit that carries everything, strength, timing, intent, and it lands clean. And for the first time, Conquest is not smiling. He is stunned, not just physically, but mentally, because he understands what just happened. He understands that he misread his opponent from the start, and that realization is what ends the fight. Because Emperor Mark does not hesitate after landing it. He follows through instantly. No pause, no speech, no mercy, finishing the fight with efficiency that feels almost cold compared to the brutality around it. And when it is over, there is no celebration, no relief, just silence. Because this version of Mark does not see victory as something emotional. It is simply the expected result of control. And that is the core difference. The reason this scenario changes everything. Because Emperor Mark removes the uncertainty that Conquest exploits. He removes the hesitation, the moral conflict, the internal struggle, and replaces it with clarity and dominance. And in a fight where both sides are already monsters, that mental shift is what tips the scale completely. Because power without direction creates chaos. But power with control creates outcomes. And Emperor Mark is built entirely around outcomes. And that means Conquest, one of the most dangerous Viltrumites ever, walks into a battle he thinks is routine, and instead finds himself facing someone who has already calculated his defeat before the first punch is thrown. And by the time he realizes it, it is already too late. And that is why this version of the fight does not just change who wins. It changes how the entire war would unfold after. Because if Emperor Mark handles Conquest like this, then every other Viltrumite threat that follows runs into the same wall. A version of Mark that does not grow during the fight, but arrives already evolved, already optimized, already willing to do whatever it takes to end things fast. And that is a terrifying shift for the entire Invincible universe, because the biggest limiter Mark ever had was himself. And once that limiter is gone, once he becomes Emperor Mark at this stage, there are very few beings left who can realistically stop him before he decides the outcome himself. And that is what makes this scenario so dangerous, not just for Conquest, but for everyone who exists in that timeline. Because the moment Mark stops holding back is the moment the balance of power breaks completely, and there is no going back from that.